Today is Tuesday, November 29th. I'm Corey Emanuel, and this is CMBG News. In today's top stories, Republican presidential candidate Herman Cain is in the spotlight once again today. Here we go again, declared Herman Cain as he faces the latest crisis in his presidential campaign, an accusation of a 13-year extramarital affair with Atlanta businesswoman Ginger White. White said in an interview with Fox 5 Atlanta that her affair with Cain ended not long before the former businessman from Georgia announced his candidacy for the White House. "It was fun," said White, 46, as she described how Cain had bought her plane tickets for a rendezvous in Palm Springs, California. "It was something that took me away from my sort of humdrum life at the time, and it was exciting." Cain went on television to deny White's claims even before the report aired. It was a faster and more deliberate response that he had managed when it was reported that 3 women alleged he had sexually harassed or groped them when he was the president of the National Restaurant Association in the mid to late 1990s. Although Cain said Monday there had been no affair with Ms. White, his lawyer issued a public statement that included no such denial and suggested that the media and the public had no business snooping into the details of the consensual conduct between adults. Cain has vowed to remain in the presidential race as long as he has the support of his wife. For those of you still searching for holiday gifts, Cyber Monday has been extended. Both Walmart and Amazon are calling the shopping spree extension Cyber Monday Deals Week. The amount of money spent on Cyber Monday was projected to be around $1.2 billion. These predictions show a trend that shoppers are doing more of their buying online. Both Walmart and Amazon feel that by extending the deals, they will reach a larger group of consumers and even some who may not realize that the deals are going on. But if you are doing most of your shopping online this year, be careful. On Monday, federal authorities had to step in and shut down 150 websites for selling knockoff or pirated merchandise to unsuspecting online bargain hunters. That's up 68 websites from last year. The government seized the domain names for the sites that sold everything from fake replica professional sports jerseys to popular UGG boots. Some sites were just one letter off from the real retailer's domain name. With online shopping becoming even more popular, officials suggest you stick to well-known retailers and double-checking that you have the domain name correct. Like Black Friday, Cyber Monday brought in record sales this year. Online traffic was up 43% compared to last year. While we generally think of online shoppers as people sitting at a computer, this year more than 7% of online shoppers did so from their cell phones. That's up from 2% last year. This year, the most popular items for shoppers were electronics such as flat-screen TVs and digital cameras. Michael Jackson's doctor, Conrad Murray, will be sentenced in just moments. The sentence hearing has begun for Dr. Conrad Murray, who was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter in the death of pop icon Michael Jackson. Murray faces up to 4 years in prison or as little as probation. If Los Angeles Superior Court Judge Michael Pastor sentences him to prison time, measures to relieve crowding in California prisons and jails could significantly shorten Murray's time lockup. Jackson's mother, Catherine, is among the late singer's relatives attending the hearing. She said she hopes Murray gets the harshest sentence possible. "I don't believe that he intended for Michael to die," Catherine Jackson said Monday. "He was just taking a chance." Prosecutors asked for the maximum 4 years behind bars and for Murray to pay Jackson's children more than $100 million in restitution. Defense lawyers requested probation. "We will share the verdict with you as soon as it is announced." Apparently, there is no age limit on throwing a punch. Just take a look at retired Canadian football players Joe Cap and Angelo Mosca, both 73-year-olds who started punching and swinging at each other during a Canadian Football League luncheon honoring their legendary status. Mosca, on the left, offered Cap a flower as a symbol of reconciliation. However, Cap, on the right, didn't take too kindly to the gesture and reacted by swinging his cane and lunging at his longtime nemesis. Mosca didn't go down without a fight, though, as you'll see from the clip. Back in the day, Mosca was a Hamilton Tiger Cats lineman, Cap a former British Columbia Lions quarterback. Their hatred for each other first emerged in 1963 with Moscow landing a hit that knocked out one of Cap's teammates during a key match that Hamilton eventually won 21-10. The video footage of the fight was taken on Friday, November 26, but only now has the clip started to go viral with nearly 500,000 views on YouTube. The wife of former Syracuse University assistant basketball coach Bernie Fine will make a statement today, challenging the implications of a tape recording of a 2002 telephone conversation with her husband's accuser that appears to show she knew of alleged sexual abuse of boys. The university fired Fine from his job as an assistant men's basketball coach Sunday night, hours after the Post, Standard, and ESPN reported on the phone conversation, which they said former Syracuse ball boy Bobby Davis had recorded between him and the coach's wife. In the tape, a woman that ESPN, citing experts, identified as Lori Fine, said she knew everything that went on with her husband, adding that he thinks above the law. In a statement announcing Fine's termination on Sunday, university officials said they were shaken by the allegations. Chancellor Nancy Cantor said the school did not know of the recording during a 2005 investigation of Davis's accusations. This and more news coming up right after this short break on CMBG News. And welcome back to CMBG News. I'm Corey Emanuel. Michael Jackson's Dr. Conrad Murray will be sentenced in just a few moments. The sentencing hearing has begun for Dr. Conrad Murray, who was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter in the death of pop icon Michael Jackson. We are now going to tune in live to the hearing of that verdict.
Fun responsibility. It's even more complicated when a judge is confronted with discretionary choices. In many of our cases, the terms are set in stone and the judge has no discretion. But when a judge is called upon to exercise discretion, it's a very significant responsibility. And that responsibility is compounded in a case such as this, where neither party is saying that Dr. Murray acted intentionally in being responsible for the death of the decedent, Michael Jackson. Even the people just acknowledged that Dr. Murray did not intend for Mr. Jackson to die. So the court is called upon to utilize its sense of fairness and decency, as well as various factors it has gained over the years of its experience, in fashioning what it believes is an appropriate sentence in this case. There are those who feel that Dr. Murray is a saint. There are those who feel Dr. Murray is the devil. He's neither. He's a human being. He stands convicted of the death of another human being. And that death is predicated not on simple civil negligence, but on criminal negligence. And it's important for the court to realize that that is the appropriate standard. The standard of criminal or gross negligence, and the fact that a jury of 12 people from remarkably different backgrounds and life experiences concluded unanimously and beyond a reasonable doubt that Dr. Murray had, with criminal negligence, caused the death of Michael Jackson. It's important to emphasize the standard of criminal negligence found by this jury beyond a reasonable doubt, because some may feel this was a medical malpractice case. It wasn't. It was and is a criminal homicide case. And this jury found beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant, with criminal negligence, caused the death of Michael Jackson. And criminal negligence is defined as follows. Criminal negligence involves more than ordinary carelessness, inattention, or mistake in judgment. A person acts or fails to perform a legal duty with criminal negligence when, 1, he or she acts or fails to perform a legal duty in a reckless way that creates a high risk of death or great bodily injury. And 2, a reasonable person would have known that acting or failing to perform a legal duty in that way would create such a risk. A person acts with criminal negligence when the way he or she acts is so different from the way an ordinarily careful person would act in the same situation that his or her act amounts to disregard for human life or indifference to the consequences of that act. It's important to remember and focus on those terms and not to treat them cavalierly, as some might, by saying, oh well, it just happened. And oh well, if it weren't for Dr. Murray, someone else may have been involved. I categorically disassociate myself from those types of statements. This is not a question about what might have happened or what if someone else had been involved if not for Dr. Murray. That is an insult to the medical profession. The fact is that Michael Jackson died because of the actions of and the failures to perform legal duties on the part of Dr. Murray. Not some other medical doctor, and also not exclusively because of Michael Jackson. I accept Mr. Chernoff's invitation to read the whole book, and I have. I've been impressed by the submissions from family and friends and associates of Dr. Murray. It is a book of Dr. Murray's life, but I've also read the book of Michael Jackson's life, not isolated chapters from either. Regrettably, as far as Dr. Murray is concerned, the most significant chapter as it relates to this case is the chapter involving the treatment or lack of treatment of Michael Jackson. And Michael Jackson died not because of an isolated, one-off occurrence or incident. He died because of a totality of circumstances which are directly attributable to Dr. Murray. Not some mistake or some accident in the early morning hours of June 25th, 2009, but because of a series of decisions that Dr. Murray made which jeopardized his patient, which violated his obligations to his patient and the essence of his Hippocratic oath. Those violations overcome the other aspects of Dr. Murray's treatment of other patients and the good deeds he may have done before that time. Dr. Murray created a set of circumstances and became involved in a cycle of horrible medicine. The practice of propofol for medicine madness, which violated his sworn obligation for money, fame, prestige, and whatever else may have occurred. So I don't look to one isolated incident in terms of the misdeeds of Dr. Murray or the deeds of Dr. Murray. But insofar as this case is concerned, Dr. Murray engaged in a recurring, continuous pattern of deceit, of lies, and regrettably, that pattern was to assist Dr. Murray. It is almost inconceivable that Dr. Murray would have persisted in this pattern over such an extensive period of time. The lies, the deceit began and continued, as we heard, for 6 weeks' worth of testimony to build up an absolutely astounding set of circumstances. The lies from the inception of his medical relationship at the Holmby Hills residence in terms of ordering propofol in staggering quantities, unprecedented quantities. The lies to the pharmacy and to the pharmacist. The sophisticated, intentional deception in that regard. the lies and repeated deception to those associated with Mr. Jackson, whether it be members of the staff and also members of the production team, AEG, and Mr. Jackson's personal and professional associates. The continuing series of lies to Michael Jackson's security and staff personnel at a critical point in time. The unconscionable lies to healthcare providers, lifesavers, paramedics, and medical personnel at UCLA, which were not designed to help his patient, quite the contrary, which were designed to deceive and give Dr. Murray a way out. The efforts on the part of Dr. Murray to subvert the process by attempting to destroy evidence. Subsequent efforts to cover up by distortions and lies to law enforcement. If one looks to the crime of involuntary manslaughter in a vacuum, one can say this may be something that went terribly wrong, and it's tragic. But it's so critically important not to have a superficial gut reaction to what happened in this case, but to look at the totality of circumstances in terms of the long-standing failure of character on the part of Dr. Murray to serve his patient. And when one does that, one can't help but be offended by the circumstances in this case. Of everything I heard and saw during the course of the trial, one aspect of the evidence stands out the most, and that is the surreptitious recording of Michael Jackson by his trusted doctor. And I have repeatedly asked myself, why did this happen and for what reason? And I can speculate and surmise that there might have been some justifiable reason, some benefit to Michael Jackson. That would be an entirely unreasonable conclusion. That tape recording was Dr. Murray's insurance policy. It was designed to record his patient surreptitiously at that patient's most vulnerable point. I can't even imagine that happening to any of us because of the horrific violation of trust. And I can't help but wonder that if there had been some conflict between Michael Jackson and Dr. Murray at a later point in time in their relationship, what value would be placed on that tape recording? If the choice were to release that tape recording to a media organization to be used against Michael Jackson. And regrettably, that failure of character was compounded by later actions on the part of Dr. Murray, each of which amounted to a betrayal of trust and confidence and a clear violation of the doctor-patient relationship and an undermining of the phenomenal role and responsibility that healthcare personnel, doctors, nurses, paramedics, healthcare aides perform in our society. We revere medical doctors, and we should, because they work diligently and they serve and they make sacrifices to keep us well And unquestionably, Dr. Murray did that. But at some point, things went terribly wrong for Dr. Murray. And when he had an opportunity, he didn't get out. He stayed in, and he got deeper and deeper in trouble, and he betrayed the very oaths and tenets of his medical profession. So I do look to the totality of circumstances. And when I look to the totality of circumstances, and when I look to the whole book, the book of Dr. Murray's life, I also look to the chapter that disturbs me most, and that's the chapter to which I've referred. I can't say that my opinion changed after I became aware of the production involving Dr. Murray after the jury verdict in this case. When Dr. Murray says, "I don't feel guilty," that's what he says. Mr. Chernoff acknowledges candidly that there's fault here, but you're not hearing it from Dr. Murray. You didn't hear it at the time that Dr. Murray interacted with the security staff and the staff at the Holmby Hills property. You didn't hear it from Dr. Murray when he encountered members of the paramedics squad, paramedics Seneff and Blunt. You certainly didn't hear it when Dr. Murray encountered Doctors Cooper and Nguyen, who were on a life-saving mission. You didn't hear it when Dr. Murray talked to the detectives of LAPD, and you certainly didn't hear it during Dr. Murray's interview in this faux documentary, faux reality production, wherein Dr. Murray says, "I don't feel guilty. I wasn't reckless. I didn't tell them about propofol because they never asked the question, and it wasn't important." And where Dr. Murray at that point says he feels betrayed and entrapped by Michael Jackson. Yipes! Talk about blaming the victim. Not only isn't there any remorse, there's umbrage and outrage on the part of Dr. Murray against the decedent without any indication of the slightest involvement in this case. To hear Dr. Murray say it, Dr. Murray was just a bystander who sort of came upon a scene and was put in this situation because of everybody else's actions other than himself, whether it be members of the family, whether it be members of AEG, whether it be Mr. Jackson or anybody else. Those are factors which cause me tremendous concern, because the essence of probation is a recognition that someone may have done something wrong, some responsibility, some remorse. Why give probation to someone who is offended by the whole idea that that person is even before the court? You can't have probation when there isn't an acknowledgement of rehabilitation and responsibility. And regrettably, Dr. Murray doesn't have any of them. Dr. Murray certainly is statutorily eligible for probation. I looked valiantly for efforts to satisfy myself that while Dr. Murray was legally eligible for probation, he was suitable for probation. And I really didn't become convinced I could find any. Dr. Murray is eligible for probation. The court declines to grant probation in this case for a host of reasons. And in making that decision, I acknowledge that Dr. Murray has, throughout his 58 years, provided services to the community and has helped many individuals. But I also acknowledge that he unquestionably violated the trust and confidence of his patient, Mr. Jackson, on a repeated nightly basis. Michael Jackson, as a patient, was vulnerable because Dr. Murray put Mr. Jackson in a position where Dr. Murray was responsible for the very life of Mr. Jackson. Dr. Murray engaged in a sophisticated scheme to obtain propofol through insidious means by lying to the pharmacist, to concoct a story, by not keeping records, and by allowing his personal life to interfere with his professional responsibilities. At the very time that people are depending upon Dr. Murray to be candid with them regarding Mr. Jackson's medical condition, Dr. Murray is lying. He's lying to the AEG people, he's lying to Mr. Ortega, he's lying to the insurance carrier, and anybody else he can, and he's engaged in personal matters while he should be paying attention to his patient. Anybody who takes an objective view of what was going on here has to come to an ineluctable conclusion that Dr. Murray abandoned his patient. And this is not a simple one-off occurrence. This is an unacceptable, egregious series of departures from the appropriate standard of care, which undermine the physician-patient relationship and which are a disgrace to the medical profession. An honorable profession which bears the blot, the scourge of what happened here. So we're not talking about a single isolated mistake. What we're talking about is a gross continuing deviation. So for those factors, the court makes a determination that Dr. Murray is not a suitable candidate for a grant of probation. The request for probation under the rules of court is denied. The question then becomes, what is the appropriate period of incarceration? The court has many options, including hybrid type sentences as authorized by the Realignment Act of 2011, and straight sentencing. This court does not have the legal authority to actually send and imprison Dr. Murray in state prison. I do not have that legal authority, and I certainly am going to follow the law in that regard. The legislature of this state signed a Realignment Act that declares certain offenses, while felonies, not to be served in state prison, and involuntary manslaughter is one of those. I do not have that legal authority. I must determine the appropriate sentence, and in making that determination, the court is guided by a triad of possible sentences that the court can impose: 2, 3, or 4 years. The court no longer has to weigh what are called aggravating circumstances or factors versus mitigating circumstances or factors, but has to give a statement of reasons. The court has determined that the appropriate term is the high term of 4 years imprisonment. I do so because, once again, I find that Dr. Murray abandoned his patient who was trusting him. His patient was vulnerable under those circumstances, having been administered potentially dangerous drugs by his medical provider. Dr. Murray's course of conduct extended over a period of time. Dr. Murray repeatedly lied, engaged in deceitful misconduct, and endeavored to cover up his transgressions. He violated the trust of the medical community, of his colleagues, and of his patient. and he has absolutely no sense of remorse, absolutely no sense of fault, and is and remains dangerous. It's easy to say, oh, well, Dr. Murray's a medical doctor. He's a smart, sophisticated man. He does not have a criminal history. He may not be licensed to practice medicine in the future, although that has nothing to do with me. I have no authority over that. The fact remains, Dr. Murray is offended by that patient dying. And I don't have any idea what will prompt Dr. Murray to do or not do something in the future that may be dangerous to a patient. If he does practice medicine in the United States or even elsewhere, I think Dr. Murray is so reckless, based upon the law and the definition of criminal negligence that I read, and everything that I heard and saw in this case, and Dr. Murray's subsequent conduct, that I believe he's a danger to the community. I've taken into account all of the factors. I've stated my reasons, and those reasons, the nature and character of the offense, distinguish this charge of involuntary manslaughter in this case, and this conviction of involuntary in this case, from other cases involving involuntary manslaughter. And there's a fundamental aspect of the criminal justice system which is involved here, and that is the fundamental aspect of punishment. It should be made very clear that experimental medicine is not going to be tolerated. And Mr. Jackson was an experiment. The fact that he participated in it does not excuse or lessen the blame of Dr. Murray, who simply could have walked away and said no, as countless others did. Dr. Murray was intrigued by the prospect, and he engaged in this money for medicine madness that is simply not going to be tolerated by me. So as to sentencing in this case, the request for probation is denied. The court imposes the high term of 4 years imprisonment in this case. Pursuant to the Realignment Act of 2011 and the provisions of Penal Code Section 1170, Subdivision H, that 4-year sentence is to be served in the Los Angeles County Jail under the care, supervision, and direction of the Los Angeles County Sheriff. Dr. Murray is to pay an $800 restitution fine pursuant to the provisions of Penal Code Section 1202.4 and the statutory scheme therein, a $30 court security fee pursuant to Penal Code Section 1465.8, Subdivision A, Paragraph 1, and a $40 criminal conviction assessment pursuant to Government Code Section 70373. As a convicted felon, Dr. Murray is ordered to provide specimens and samples of blood, saliva, fingerprints, and palm prints for law enforcement investigative purposes and the state DNA databank, and his willful refusal to provide any such specimens and samples is a separate crime. I am concerned about the restitution requests in this case. I sense that the people and the defense share those concerns. It's not often that courts are called upon to order restitution in the sum of $101,821,871.65 based upon a 3-line statement in an email and electronic mail. So the court is going to order Dr. Murray to pay appropriate restitution to the estate of Michael Jackson and to the children and other family of Michael Jackson, pursuant to the provisions of Penal Code Section 1202.4 and the case of People versus Lunsford, Lunsford, at 67 Calap 4th 901, in the amount and manner as determined by this court at a later restitution hearing, where the court can be provided by the people through Mr. Weitzman and through anybody else with more detailed information. Now, Mr. Walgren, as you know, Mr. Weitzman indicated that the above information is a combination of monies actually spent. Well, I'd like to see it. And, quote, some very sophisticated projections on the anticipated revenue stream from a concert that had been sold out before Mr. Jackson's death, end quote. I believe we've discussed during various motions in this case issues involving detailed financial records. Certainly the defense and the people have been interested in those types of records for the length of this litigation. But before this court can order and will order any such restitution, I need much more detailed information. And that may involve strategic choices on the part of the Jackson family and on the part of the estate, whether and under what circumstances those figures are to be released. But
well, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard it here. Michael Jackson's Dr. Conrad Murray has been sentenced to 4 years in a Los Angeles County jail, and restitution will be declared at a later hearing. Again, Dr. Conrad Murray, the late Michael Jackson's doctor, has been sentenced to 4 years in a Los Angeles County jail, and a restitution will be declared at a later hearing. Transitioning now over to world news. A psychiatric report on Anders Behring Breivik found that the confessed gunman is insane and therefore not fit to stand trial over twin attacks that killed 77 people, Norway's VG newspaper said Tuesday. The VG report was published shortly before Norwegian prosecutors scheduled news conference to discuss the contents of the psychiatric evaluation. 240-page report compiled by two psychiatrists was delivered to the prosecutor's office earlier Tuesday. The assessment was made after 13 interviews with Breivik, an interview with his mother, and an examination of his medical history. The experts also reviewed police questioning and video from the reconstruction of the shooting rampage on Utoya Island. The Debage Daily reported 32-year-old Breivik confessed to carrying out the July 22nd twin attacks. First, he detonated a car bomb outside the government buildings in central Oslo that housed the offices of Prime Minister Jens Stoltenberg, killing 8 people. Then he went on a shooting spree at a youth camp on Utoya Island, killing 69, mostly young people. But he refused to plead guilty, saying that the attacks were atrocious but necessary in his first campaign against multiculturalism and Muslims in Europe. Breaking down the door, Iranian students made their presence known by storming the British embassy. Tuesday, students threw papers and replaced the British flag with an Iranian one. Iran's state-run Press TV reported police had the incident under control, but Britain's Foreign Office said details are still emerging. The Foreign Office added under international law, including the Vienna Convention, the Iranian government has a clear duty to protect diplomats and embassies in their country. The office said it asked the Iranian charge d'affaires in London to urge the Iranian authorities to act with utmost urgency to ensure the situation is brought under control. It is now advising British nationals to Iran to stay indoors, keep a low profile, and await further advice. The incursion happened during a protest demanding that the British ambassador be sent home immediately. The Iranian parliament voted Sunday to expel the ambassador and reduce diplomatic relations with the United Kingdom in retaliation for newly imposed Western sanctions, according to Iran's official IRNA news agency. The vote must still be approved by the Guardian Council, the body that determines if laws passed by Parliament are compatible with Sharia law or Islamic law. Foreign Office called the Iranian parliament's vote Sunday regrettable. Britain cut off financial ties with Iran last week over concerns about Iran's nuclear program, the first time it has cut an entire country's banking sector off from British finance, the British Treasury announced. 40,000 troops are expected to leave Afghanistan by the end of 2012. Drawdown plans announced by the U.S. as more than a dozen other nations will shrink the foreign military footprint in Afghanistan at the close of next year, leaving Afghan forces increasingly on the front lines of the decade-long war. The United States is pulling out the most 33,000 by the end of 2012. That's one-third of 101,000 American troops who were in Afghanistan in June, the peak of U.S. military presence in the war, according to figures provided by the Pentagon. Others in the 49-nation coalition have announced withdrawal plans too, even as they insist they are not rushing to leave. Many nations have vowed to keep troops in Afghanistan to continue training the Afghan police and army in the years to come. And many have pledged to keep sending aid to the impoverished country after the international combat mission ends in 2014. But Afghans fear that nation could plunge into civil war once the foreign forces go home. The confidence in the Afghan security forces has risen, but they don't share that U.S.-led coalition-stated belief that the Afghan soldiers and policemen will be ready to secure the entire nation in 3 years. Others worry the Afghan economy will collapse if foreigners leave and donors halt aid. Foreign forces begin leaving Afghanistan this year. This and more news coming up from my colleague, Katrice right after this short break.
Good afternoon and welcome to CMBG News. I'm Katrice Nolan. Today is Tuesday, November 29th, and here is what's happening across the globe. Just moments ago, as you saw here live on CMBG News, Dr. Conrad Murray has been sentenced to 4 years in prison, but no possibility of probation because of a state mandate. Murray, who was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter of the death of Michael Jackson, will be sentenced. Or just was sentenced, I should say. Jackson's mother, Catherine, hopes Murray got the harshest sentence possible. Now, at the sentencing, Los Angeles Superior Court Judge Michael Pastor had a choice ranging between probation and up to those 4 years in a state prison. But measures to relieve California prison and jail crowding could shorten the time that the doctor might be locked up. Prosecutors successfully argue that Murray's reckless use of the surgical anesthetic propofol helped Jackson sleep without proper monitoring equipment, and that, they claim, led to the singer's death. Testimony during the trial revealed that Murray gave Jackson propofol nearly every night in the 2 months before his death on June 25th, 2009. Now, Jackson was preparing for a comeback concert in London, which was set for the next month in 2009. Murray again was found guilty 3 weeks ago. The Jackson family is expected to be in court for the sentencing. Prosecutors were asking for the maximum 4 years behind bars and want Murray to pay Jackson's children more than $100 million in restitutions. Defense lawyers want probation, not prison time, and each side wanted to have their chance to present oral arguments Tuesday, but their positions were detailed in sentencing and memos filed with the judge last week. Again, Dr. Conrad Murray has been sentenced to 4 years in prison, as you saw right here live on CMBG News, with no possibility of probation. And stay with CMBG News as we continue to develop this story. And if we have any more information, we will pass it along to you as soon as it comes in to us. Another developing story to tell you about now. U.S. presidential candidate Herman Cain is under the microscope yet again after an Atlanta, Georgia woman has come out and said she had an extramarital 13-year-long affair with the candidate. Although Herman Cain denies the allegations, he says he will continue his presidential campaign despite those allegations. The woman is ginger white, and she said that her affair with Cain did not end until he was getting ready to announce his run for the White House. Now, the 17 finance ministers of the countries that use the euro converged on EU headquarters Tuesday in a desperate bid to save their currency and to protect Europe, the United States, Asia, and the rest of the global economy from a debt-induced financial tsunami. The ministers were discussing ideas that would have been taboo until recently, before things just got as bad as they are. Countries are trying to give fiscal sovereignty to a central authority. German Chancellor Angela Merkel reiterated her support for changes to Europe's current treaties in order to create a fiscal union, and that will include binding and enforceable commitments, that is, by all Euro countries. Changes to existing Eurozone rules are being touted as one way the Eurozone can get out of its debt crisis, which has already forced bailouts of Greece, Ireland, and Portugal, and is threatening to engulf bigger economies such as Italy. If Italy were to default on its debts of around euro 1.9 trillion, which is about 2.5 trillion in US dollars, the fallout could spell ruin for the euro project itself and send shockwaves throughout the global economy. Even countries outside the Eurozone were conjuring up pressure on the ministers to find a solution quickly. President Barack Obama, meeting with the top EU officials on Monday, said a European failure to resolve its debt crisis would complicate his own efforts to create jobs in the U.S. And even Poland, historically wary of Germany's dominance beyond its borders, also appealed for help. Iranian students stormed British diplomatic sites Tuesday in Tehran. They brought down the Union Jack flag, burning an embassy vehicle and throwing documents from windows. The mob surged past riot police into the British embassy complex, when they pelted with thousands of patrol bombs and stones 2 days after Iran's parliament approved a bill that reduces diplomatic relations with Britain following London's support of recently upgraded Western sanctions on Tehran over its disputed nuclear program. Now, flames shot out of a sports utility vehicle parked outside the brick building. Demonstrators outside the embassy also burned British flags and clashed with police at the rally, which had been organized by student groups at universities and seminaries. Less than 2 hours later, police appeared to regain control of the site, but the official IRNA news agency said about 300 protesters entered the British ambassador's residence in another part of the city and replaced British flags with Iranian flags. The British Foreign Office harshly denounced the melee and said Iran has, quote, a clear duty under international law to protect diplomats and its offices. The psychiatric evaluation ordered by the Oslo, Norway court found that confessed mass killer Anders Breivik was insane when he killed 77 people in a bomb and shooting rampage in Norway, and he should be sent to a psychiatric ward instead of prison. The psychiatric evaluation ordered by an Oslo court found that the self-styled anti-Muslim resistance fighter was psychotic during the July 22nd attacks, the country's worst peacetime massacre, which means he's not mentally fit to be sentenced to prison. Prosecutors told reporters that the report, written by two psychiatrists who spent a total of 36 years talking to Breivik, will be interviewed by a panel of forensic psychiatrists before the court makes a ruling on whether Breivik is legally insane. Their conclusions contrasted with earlier comments by the head of that board, who told the Associated Press in July that it was unlikely that Breivik would be declared legally insane because the attacks were so carefully planned and executed. In Norway, an insanity defense requires that a defendant be in a state of psychosis while committing the crime with which he or she is charged with. That means the defendant has lost contact with reality to the point that he or she is no longer in control of his or her actions. The 243-page report will be reviewed by a panel from the Norwegian Board of Forensic Medicine, which could ask for additional information and add its own opinions. Another developing story to tell you about: the U.S. government has agreed to pay $2.5 million to the woman and family of a Florida man who was killed in the 2001 anthrax attacks. If you may recall, the anthrax attacks happened after the 9/11 attacks. Maureen Stevens is the wife of the man who was killed. She reportedly will drop all other claims stemming from the death of her husband, Robert Stevens. Court documents say the U.S. did not admit fault. Stevens' lawsuit, which was filed in 2003, claimed the government was negligent because it failed to stop someone at the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases from creating weapons-grade anthrax. Anthrax, found in letters, killed her husband and 4 other people. 17 more people were sickened. Now, the settlement names her children and her 3 grown children, and notes that attorney's fees of more than 25% will be paid out of that amount. Robert Stevens worked in Boca Raton for American Media Incorporated, publisher of the National Enquirer, Sun, and Globe tabloids when he was exposed to anthrax. He died October 5th, 2001. Other anthrax-laced letters were mailed to television networks in New York and the U.S. Senate office building in Washington. Aid workers in Somali residents expressed outrage Tuesday, a day after the militant group Al-Shabaab banned 16 aid groups from its territory. A decision officials said puts tens of thousands of sick mothers and malnourished children at risk. Tens of thousands of Somalis have already died from drought and famine-related causes this year, and the UN estimates that 250,000 people still face starvation in a country plagued by violence. Somalis expressed sadness and anger at Al-Shabaab's decision. one that could further damage a group highly unpopular in many Somali circles because of its strict social rules and harsh punishments like amputations and stonings. Al-Shabaab on Monday ordered UNICEF, the World Health Organization, and Danish Refuge Council, among others, to leave. World temperatures keep rising and are heading for a threshold that could lead to irreversible changes of the Earth. And that comes from a report by the UN Weather Office, and they said that today. 2011 is tied for the 10th hottest year on record since records were started recording in 1850. The office said it in its annual assessment of average global temperatures. The Arctic sea ice has also shrunk to record low volumes this year, it said. The 13 hottest years on the books all have occurred in the last 15 years. The IMO's preliminary report, based on the first 10 months of the year, was released in Geneva and at the UN climate talks in South Africa. It provided a bleak backdrop to negotiations who are seeking ways to limit pollution blamed for global warming. 2011 has been a year of extreme weather, the Weather Service said. Parching drought in East Africa has left tens of thousands dead, and there have been deadly floods in Asia and 14 separate weather catastrophes in the United States, with damages topping $1 billion each. Climate negotiations have set a goal of keeping temperatures from rising more than 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit, and that is 2 degrees Celsius, above pre-industrial levels. They already are 1.4 degrees Fahrenheit above 1750 average. Small islands want to target resets at 2.3 Fahrenheit, saying their very existence is threatened by rising sea levels. Egypt's military rulers claimed the surprisingly heavy turnout for the first election since Hosni Mubarak's ouster was proof of popular support for their democratic transition plan. Long lines formed at polling stations for a second day of voting Tuesday, and the head of the election commission proclaimed turnout so far has been, quote, massive and unexpected, but he did not give any figures. The turnout boosts the military council after protests that erupted on November 19th in Cairo's Tahrir Square and other cities, denouncing the ruling of generals and demanding they transfer power immediately to a civilian authority. At times, the protests drew more than 100,000, and a crackdown by security forces killed more than 40 people over 9 days. Major General Mukhtar al-Mullah, a member of the ruling Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, said the vote for a parliament responds to all those who were skeptical that elections will place on time. He called the turnout unprecedented in the history of the Arab world's parliamentary life. Despite the turmoil leading up to the vote, Egyptians poured out to participate, eager to cast ballots in the country's first free and fair elections in living memory. The voting was still going strong on Tuesday, the second and final day of the first round of elections, with long lines forming again at polling stations in the capital of Cairo and other cities. And stay with us here at CMBG News. We'll have more right after this break.